We talk about it a lot on this programme. We talk about the corruption of parliamentarians. We talk about the corruption of businessmen. We talk about Donald Trump and the corruption going on overt corruption going on in the United States of America. But did you know that there is such a thing as a corruption index? And we are slipping down the scale because in a lot of democracies right now, there's a lot of corruption. So the UK has fallen to its lowest point on the Global Corruption Perceptions Index since the index underwent a major revamp in 2012. According to Transparency International, who authored this index, domestic scandals, political donors receiving preferential treatments and MPs acting as lobbyists have contributed to this worrying result. Peter Mandelson will feature, I imagine, in next year's result. The UK remains 20th in the global ranking for the third consecutive year, a significant decline from its top 10 position back in 2017. Well, joining me now, I'm thrilled to say, is Daniel Bruce, Chief Executive of Transparency International UK. A good evening to you, Daniel. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, good evening.
So I've just outlined a couple of things there. What do you look for when you're looking at potential or real corruption in a country?
Yes, so the Corruption Perceptions Index ranks 180 countries around the world where a score of 100 is completely clean and a score of 0 would theoretically be completely corrupt. And what the CPI is a poll of polls. It is a mixture of primary sources that are expert surveys of global business leaders, academics, and other data feeding into sources such as the Economist Intelligence Unit, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum. And we put all of these together, blend these surveys together to see what those international views of each country's corruption landscape is in its public sector to ultimately give us these rankings. And as you set out, the UK has really been on a concerning trajectory for a number of years now. We saw a very big drop 3 years ago today, and then today we've dropped another point compared to 12 months ago, down to 70 out of 100, which is our lowest score on record.
And what is attributing to that? Because I presume, does corruption change? Does it morph? Does it become is every year a different set of boundaries? Because, if you suddenly outlawed, I don't know, single massive payments to a political party, then that would add to corruption, right?
Yeah, one of the advantages of this index and the way that it blends all of these different sources together is that you can get under the bonnet of what sort of global perceptions are saying about corruption risk in a country's public sector in quite a specific way. And certainly what we see in today's score is growing concern about political corruption risk in the UK, and that spans the period just before our general election in 2024, and it spans the first few months or year or so of the Labour government, where we've seen, political concern about the influence of political donors with both of the two largest parties in that period, and then going back a little bit further, concerns about the way that COVID contracts were handed out during the pandemic, general sense of cronyism and patronage in the House of Lords, and all of this points to, I think, for mature democracies like the UK, the need for really ambitious systemic reforms that get us beyond this sort of reactionary approach to some of the scandals that we've spent a lot of the last few days talking about.
I mean, would Lord Ali, for example, and the donation of lots of clothes to the Prime Minister, would that be seen as potential corruption since he was given preferential treatment?
I think that the corruption risk that you see in that case is that Lord Ali is or was one of the biggest donors to the Labour Party, the now party of government, and early in their tenure in government, he was given a pass to 10 Downing Street. So what does that do in terms of general public perceptions? It creates the impression, if not the reality, that because somebody is putting big bucks into their party of choice, they are getting preferential access to the seat of power. And that is really the antithesis to what we should be seeing in our representative democracy. democracy where we should have a level playing field, where it's one person, one vote, and where, political finance and the big money that runs the risk of corrupting our political system isn't having this outsized influence.
And I mean, your pen must have been twitching over the Epstein revelations, because we've not only got Lord Mandelson, who apparently was passing secrets, but now potentially Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, when he was trade envoy, doing a similar thing. Do they count? Will they count next year? Will we be going even further down the list?
Well, let's see. Recent events won't have fed into this year's index because it takes a few months to put the final data together. So the kind of cut-off of the data is the sort of summer each year. But absolutely, very high-profile allegations such as these are capturing global attention, and therefore they drive perceptions of what corruption risk looks like in the UK and of course around the world. And it goes without saying that the allegations against Peter Mandelson and the emerging concerns around similar alleged conduct on the part of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor have proven are very serious indeed, and would amount to an abuse of entrusted power by some of the most powerful individuals in our country at the time. We shall obviously have to see where that goes and allow due process to play out. But the big concern with cases like this is every time allegations or investigations like this dominate the headlines, they don't just happen in a bubble and then go away again. And the likes of you and I will stop talking about it and move on to something else, I'm sure, in the months ahead. But each time we see things like this, it gradually erodes that public trust. And that's what really concerns us. And that's why we're really calling on government today to go much further in its reforms to political finance, to corruption risk in Parliament, to drive better standards in government. Because really all we've seen from successive governments now is just tinkering in the margins.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's always a big concern of mine, Daniel, about the erosion of democracy. If we don't believe in the systems anymore, we don't tend to vote for them, and then the whole thing falls apart. We've just seen Labour sweep in with a massive majority on 33% of the vote, for example. So it is concerning. But with a perception index, is perception equal to actual? I can perceive some things differently to how you might perceive things. So if there's a perception index that the UK is perceived to be going downhill in terms of corruption, is it actually?
Well, perceptions are driven by events, aren't they? And if we cast our minds back to those terrible years of the COVID-19 pandemic and the concerns that featured very heavily in the index when we had that big drop in 2023, we know in that case through our own research and investigations here at Transparency International UK that a third of £45 billion of COVID contracts that were handed out by the last government carry 3 or more corruption red flags, and that's hard data that aligns with perceptions and the concerns of other global business leaders and academics. And of course, you've mentioned these recent allegations and concerns. Those are real cases, real investigations, and of course they get noticed. So, corruption in its absolute sense is a very difficult thing to measure because corruption has many faces. It's not just about payment of bribes to public officials. It's about wider issues around illicit financial flows in and out of the City of London, which this index doesn't capture. And it's about that thing that occurs in the shadows, political corruption, until it sort of bursts out into the headlines in the way that we've seen it. So measuring perceptions is one of the most authoritative ways that's been established to do this. But again, perceptions are driven by events. And something I always encourage people to do when they look at this index is say, well, the UK is 70 out of 100, still a pretty good score, 20th in the world out of 180 countries. But it's that decline which is being replicated in other mature democracies that we should be really concerned about.
Oh, and what about the individuals like Elon Musk, right, for example? Is it corruption, or is it seen as corruption for him to interfere with politics across Europe and in the UK, with huge donation of 70 odd million to Reform, I think it was? Is that a corruption? Is that corrupting? And if it is that a British corruption or an American or South African corruption?
Well, that's a really interesting case that you pick up on, which was just over a year ago now, wasn't it? That Elon Musk was suggesting that he would give $100 billion, about £70 million, to the Reform UK party. In the end, he didn't. But let's just strip it back a little bit. Our electoral law, as it stands, does not allow foreign donations into UK political parties because
they were a business, aren't they, Reform?
Reform UK are a limited company, but it's about where the money is coming from. Now, UK companies can donate to UK political parties, and so what was being suggested at the time was that this £70 million would be channeled through one of Elon Musk's UK subsidiaries. And we, for a long time, have been calling for tighter regulation on corporate donations to make sure that UK companies can only make donations on the basis of the profits that they have made in this country, so that they cannot be used as a vehicle for foreign donations that would otherwise be against the law. And that law, as it stands, is there to protect the UK's democracy from foreign interference, which could come from anywhere in the world, and it could come from foreign interests with malign intent towards the UK, of course. And it's designed to make sure that political party financing in the UK is provided by the electorate of the UK, who make their own choices at the ballot box. But it's a very good example of what, had it come to pass, it would have been 5 times the largest political donation on record, and it would have had a hugely distorting effect on the bank balance of the political parties, including, the recipient party in particular. And this is the big point about big money in politics. There needs to be a level playing field. And one of the things we've been calling for the UK government to do for a long time now is to put a cap on donations and on spending in general elections to make it fairer and to protect our representative democracy.
I'll be fascinated to see what your perceptions index says next year, particularly with regards to the US. I think that's going to be very, very interesting. Fascinating chat. Thank you, Daniel. I really enjoyed that. Daniel Bruce, Chief Executive of Transparency International UK. So if you didn't know it, we're getting more corrupt. Nice, isn't it? Quick break. Back in a sec.